Hello, welcome to the sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Players Championship 2016 edition. I'm Nick Miller alongside Caleb Scherer, back for his second straight Players Championship after a ridiculous run last year to make it. He squeaked in again this year, kind of one of the last two in, but you made it.
Yeah.
And I got to imagine you're pretty excited to be back.
Oh, yeah. It was kind of like the whole goal of this year, just grinding it out.
All right, well, you made it back. Large part of the reason you are back is this legacy deck that you play, and you have your own storm counter. So I think we know what you're playing.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to jump into it. Storm, of course, is the name of the game here for Caleb Scherer and Legacy. Let's talk about the cards, and we're going to start here with the win conditions for those of you unaware of what the Legacy Storm deck is doing. Caleb, take us through what it does.
All right, so as far as like the win conditions, kind of with this version, you have two main avenues to victory, which are either casting Ad Nauseam, which, by the low converted mana cost of most of the cards in the deck, you just get to kind of draw a bunch of cards and then eventually cast our actual kill card, which is Tendrils of Agony. So play 9 spells eventually. Boom, that's the 10th one, kind of the gist of it. Or we have kind of the alternate path, which is way more definite, when Past in Flames, where you'll combine that with, as we'll see later, Infernal Tutor, to kind of cast some rituals, Lion's Eye Diamond, and so forth, and then play Past in Flames to give it all flashback, then just cast it all again, so you get to just take another game, and then tutor again, how lucky for Tendrils of Agony with that.
All comes back down to Tendrils of Agony, a card that most of the time is a one of in the deck, but I noticed you have 2 copies.
Yes, I used to run one. I was always actually a very big proponent of minimal win conditions, but actually like the reason that I have 2 in this version is the fact that Ad Nauseam is now a much higher percentage of our kills, and the fact that, as we'll see in a bit, we run Chrome Mox now, which requires an exile effect, so therefore if we're stuck with our Tendrils in hand and need to Chrome Mox, we can actually exile it without, detriment and so forth.
Losing your win condition. All right, so we'll move ahead. One thing this deck does is generate a ton of mana, and not just from the lands. We're talking rituals, and then we're talking all this artifact mana. So you got Chrome Mox, as you mentioned, LED, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Lotus Petal here as your free mana.
Yeah.
This stuff is important. Why?
Basically, with this, so we need a, high caliber of, initial mana sources as well as land. So for instance, like forming 2 mana on turn 1 is very critical. So that's why we have, of course, Lotus Petal, and then the Chrome Mox to also facilitate that. And another reason is for Ad Nauseam itself. Say you don't have any mana floating after you cast Ad Nauseam, then you're going to need to hit one of these zeros to start it, and as well as Lion's Eye Diamond, which is kind of a functional Black Lotus in this deck, and it's nice synergy with, as we'll see again, Infernal Tutor. By discarding our hand with that on the stack means that we can just get whatever we want.
All right, so we generate a lot of mana, and what are we doing with all this mana? We'll see on the next couple of slides. Create more mana. Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, 2 cards that are helping you get to the pretty much threshold of 5 or 7 black mana, depending on what you really need, starting with Infernal Tutor.
Yep, exactly. So like here, what we'll use is from those initial mana sources, we can cast Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual to net, 2 or 3 mana apiece to get up to, as you said, like 7 being kind of a critical number. And what's nice is these not being artifacts and actually being instants means they have the synergy with Past in Flames. So otherwise we wouldn't actually be able to kind of utilize that card. And then kind of the crowning jewel of it all is, once we've cast all our mana sources, we're usually on an empty hand, so we just look back at the one card that's important, which is Infernal Tutor, which is basically just a bunch of text, and then its Hellbent part, which is Demonic Tutor.
Right.
So we get whatever we want, and we can choose, do we want to Past in Flames, Ad Nauseam, or just Tendrils them right away if we've cast a bunch of spells.
Important thing you note, these are instances, so you can do a lot of kind of respond to things, then generate a bunch of mana to try to play around counter spells and whatnot.
Yeah, like for instance, like with like, you might be able to play with like a counterbalance, like, oh, if you want to keep a 2 on top, I'll like, try to, play with some Dark Rits to make you reshuffle, do things like that.
All right, so we'll move on. Other things, we're looking for the certain pieces in this deck, so you're using a lot of search. Infernal Tutor helps you find that one thing, but here, Brainstorm, Preordain, Ponder, all the cards that help you sculpt the game plan.
Exactly. Like pretty much this deck is a functional black deck with card filter. So, of course we want to run the best, that we have available in Legacy, the Brainstorm, Preordain, Ponder package. Here we have 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder, only 2 Preordain. because, as we'll see on the next slide, we also have 4 Gitaxian Probe, which kind of function in the same realm. And one thing I always like to have is a minimum of 14 cantrips in my deck. So I'll have like that critical mass of redundancy.
Moving on to the next page, we'll see Probe. You know, not only a cantrip, you get to see what you have to play around, but it also combos pretty well with Cabal Therapy, the ideal discard spell in this deck alongside Duress.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And also, you know, with here, I've also kind of switched up from what is considered normal in Ant, which is the 3-3 split between Cabal Therapy and Duress, because also the format is getting faster and more creature-based in general. But one thing that's pretty sweet about this tournament is we get deck lists. So if I know your entire 60 and what's most likely, like, you know, we actually rely less on Probe, even though the combo, as we can clearly see, is very, very potent. So it actually gains additional value.
Right. Other lists can kind of go 4-2 with Duress if you're unsure of the field, but you're a seasoned, you know, pilot of this deck. You know what you're looking for anyway, plus the addition of deck lists. You're going to know what you need to be naming with Cabal Therapy.
Oh, precisely.
All right, so we'll move on for the rest of the deck here. This is the rest of your actual mana from the form of lands. You have your 8 fetches to find yourself your Underground Seas, and we'll see on the other page Volcanic Island, and Swamp if you need to play around Wasteland or anything like that. All right, so we're going to take a look at the sideboard because this deck is very, you know, strong, and it's hard to disrupt because of how many elements you got going on, but you do have some cards you need to look out for post-board. So first of all, for Abrupt Decay, what are we shooting here?
Basically, with this version, I've kind of shoehorned all of my, hey, if it's a permanent that sticks on the board, this is my answer. In the past, I've been a little bit kind of shying away from making that something that I want to use, except when there's a bunch of counterspells like against Counterbalance, etc. But now, basically, with everything being a hate bear, even as we've seen with the new pieces for Death and Taxes, with Prelate and so forth, we just want to max out on these to kill whatever could possibly be down there, since we already have some discard, so we can fight on the stack.
Right. Things like, you know, Sanctum Prelate are new cards, and but you of course have Cabal Therapy to try to shoot those before they land.
Exactly. Yep.
Then Xanadu Swarm here, great against the counterspell decks.
Yeah, like I've actually gone back to Xanadu Swarm in the deck to fight a lot of the counterspells, and the fact that I have 4 Cabal Therapies main now means that against a lot of those decks with like Show and Tell or Miracles, we can, you know, functionally have 7 Cabal Therapies, since they can't counter those Xanadu Swarm even with like Flusterstorm and so forth, which is great.
And Graveyard Hate here with Surgical Extraction, something important in this deck. You want to have a lot of free spells.
Yes.
And, you know, as you're trying to combo off and use all your mana.
Yeah, like it's in this version actually, like, you know, in addition to the kind of quote unquote obvious application of, hey, I'm gonna, you know, exile your Grizzlebrand or something to reanimate, is in this deck with the 2 Chrome Moxen being main, is this kind of gets to switch out with that a few times, and like for instance I'll bring that in against like Delver and so forth, because it functions as a peak, which is very, very important versus decks that have about 3 to 4 different pieces of disruption, so you don't know exactly what's up. And, you know, for countering Snapcaster Mages, which are picking up as 3s and 4-ofs, especially with the new Friedman lists for Grixis Delver. So what's kind of cool is that it actually serves a greater purpose here than just the usual, hey, the faster decks.
Almost another, you know, Gitaxian Probe,
exactly.
Sorta. All right, so we'll see what the rest of the stuff here. Croson Grip, another Chromox, as you mentioned, and then here's like your extra win con, Empty the Warrens, hanging out on the sideboard.
Yeah, so basically here we have the 2 Croson Grip. So these are, you know, kind of the easy application is for Miracles, where they're going to just have enough targets and we need something that can't be countered, you know, most of the time at least, to kill that. And it also gives us the critical 5 and 6 part pieces of removal for like lock-based decks like Eldrazi, Big Red, things like that, you know, don't just get hosed by Chalice for 1. So we have the 4 Decay and 2 Croson Grip. So, you know, that critical
have
mass.
all the answers for anything from Sphere, you know, Chalice.
Yeah, just whatever they could throw at me.
Okay. Extra mana here.
Yeah, just also when I'm trying to speed up the deck for against these lock decks, it's pretty much you want to be the best Belcher deck you can be. So I want to have 7 zeros, so you know, go up to 3 Chrome Mox. So kind of basically what I have here is like the ability to turn into like almost like a functional test deck is kind of the idea.
Take a look at the last slide if there is one. There's just 2 more lands that produce your green mana. You of course have 9 green spells in your sideboard, so you're going to need the green mana.
Exactly. Like for here, like usually, like in the past, a lot of people play just like 1 Tropical Island, stuff like that, and then like 4 Abrupt Decay, maybe 2 Xanadu Swarms, call it a day. But since here I'm relying on, as I mentioned earlier, the Abrupt Decays for pretty much my catch-all for, hey, if it's on the board, I just need to kill it. I want to have 2 sources, since a lot of times those lock-based decks have Wasteland as well. And I just wouldn't feel comfortable having one or the other. And sometimes it does kind of screw with your mana a bit when you're forced to fetch this that only taps for blue-green versus black-green because on a go-off turn, you want to actually have more black available than blue.
Yeah, you mentioned you're more of a black deck with kind of some blue spells, so you definitely got to have the option between both of them. All right, so we've seen your deck. We knew this was pretty much what you were going to play. Now, Legacy is the first portion of day one. You know, did you think about the metagame and whether it would be good for Storm, or are you just basically, I'm going to play the deck I know the best and make other people beat me?
Pretty much it was kind of mostly the latter, and then kind of what I did last year, which is same thing of, hey, let's look at the board, because the main deck I can kind of slightly askew. Like, for instance, here I have the 2 Chromox and stuff to be a slightly faster deck, just in case people, we'll bring a lot more like of the lock-based Eldrazi, Big Red, etc. But while also still retaining a lot of the Delver properties that this deck is usually intrinsically strong against, since I expect a lot of that in the field as well. So kind of, again, exactly, just hedging with what I know.
All right, well, we saw last year you used the Legacy portion and Storm to get off to a great start. Assume you're hoping for the same this year?
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right, well, Caleb, the deck looks great. We know you know how to play it, so we'll be looking forward to that early tomorrow or Saturday if you're watching on Saturday. So Caleb, thanks for joining me here in the sideboard.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all week long for the action here in Roanoke.